The House will come to order. Member for Meeker, Representative Erdahl, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Each year, I am pleased to bring in cheese from the City of Litchfield and First District Association, one of the largest food milk processors, not only in Minnesota, but in the entire United States. 7 million pounds of cheese come to Litchfield, 7 million pounds of milk come to Litchfield every day. And some of the cheese made is here today. I want to thank my wife, Karen, for all the work that she did in getting the cheese here, and for my legislative assistant, Jennifer, for her work with the other helpers in cutting up the cheese. And so it's back there, cheese, crackers, enjoy yourselves, and have a good afternoon.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Peppin from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Sunday, May 20th, 2018, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills. Senate file numbers 2620, 3062, and 3504, and House file number 3352.
Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 3673. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate file number 3673, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to human services, the first engrossment.
Call upon the author of the bill from Asante, Representative Johnson B., to explain the bill.
Mr. Speaker, members, this bill deals with the civil commitment discharge requirements. As many of you know, there'll be a flyer coming around dealing with the Fugelseth decision by the courts. Fugelseth was in the MSOP program. He was placed there in 2003, and he was recently discharged without conditions. The courts had ruled that since our current law talks about requiring inpatient treatment, and since he was no longer going to be in inpatient treatment, they released him from the program without any conditions. And part of the program is the conditions to make sure that they can survive after they've been involved in the program for sometimes decades. This is a situation that does need to be addressed and be addressed immediately. And Mr. Speaker, I believe there's an amendment for this bill.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Dean N. moves to amend Senate file number 3673, the first engrossment, as follows. The amendment is coded DE3.
Call upon the author of the amendment from Washington, Representative Dean M., to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This narrows the focus of this to the Fugelseth case, which is just a very specific word interpretation within that case for inpatient treatment. So it gets rid of that, which was the confusing loophole within the Fugelseth case. There's an understanding with Senate and also with the stakeholders that this is agreed upon language.
Discussion to the amendment. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I would encourage you to support this amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give this bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate file number 3673, as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, first I want to thank Representative Hansen for keeping us up to date about all the information that we needed to know and working very hard to help us address this issue. And I want to thank Representative Johnson. Members, this is something that we will continue to work on. I believe that this is an important first step, and I encourage you to support the bill.
Member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'd like to, in advance of this vote, thank the body for supporting this. Several weeks ago, I attended the notification meeting in Mendota Heights about the release of this individual, and there were a number of questions about this bill. And so I appreciate the work of GOP staff and Representative Hillstrom for this, and I would encourage a yes vote.
Discussion to the bill. The author of the bill from Asante, Representative Johnson B.
Members, this is a serious situation that we have to deal with. It's not only this court case, but there's other court cases that we do have to look at. And it is our intent to work with the rest of the issues of underlying bill with a group of stakeholders over the interim and come back next year to address those. And with that, I ask for a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion on the bill, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. Joachim votes aye. There being 119 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 3297. The clerk will report the bill.
Senate File number 3297, number 2 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to local government, the first engrossment.
Call upon the author of the bill from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney, to explain his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a bill that allows the McCarrons, the St. Paul City Water Department, to use the system of design and build for its remodel and expansion of the St. Paul Water Treatment Plant at Lake McCarrons. There is an amendment that was added on in the Senate that requires that they get 3 bids. They're very happy with that. They were planning to do that anyhow. This process will allow cost savings for the department, Water Department in St. Paul. I ask for your green vote.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File number 3297.
Third reading. Discussion to the bill. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Lilly votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Yeah. There being 120 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. Without objection, we will revert to messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendments the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File Number 3422, an act relating to game and fish. The message is signed Cal R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate. Fabian moves that the House refuse to concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 3422, that the Speaker appoint a conference committee of 5 members of the House, and that the House requests that a like committee be appointed by the Senate to confer on the disagreeing votes of the 2 houses.
Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, House File 3422 is the infamous gizzard shad bill, and we do have some differences with the Senate. We'd like to go to conference committee.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion prevails. The motion is adopted. Message from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which the amendments of concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File Number 4133, an act relating to agriculture. The message is signed Cal R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate. Anderson P. moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File Number 4133 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Call upon the author of the bill from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Mr. Speaker, yes, that is my resolution.
Discussion. Member from Hennepin, Representative Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just looking for the author to provide an explanation to the body of what has come back.
Member from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and Minority Leader. This is the Ag Policy Bill that was heard on the floor a couple of days ago, went to the Senate, and a couple of changes were made. One, I think, a pretty significant change, and in the spirit of compromise, we've heard a lot this session about the nitrogen ruling that the Department of Ag is doing, and we hadn't had a requirement that come back to the legislature for final approval. We've taken that out of this bill now. It was taken out in the Senate, and really in the spirit of compromise. And what we added back in, actually, again, took out, was a provision dealing with what's called the Soil Loss Index, and that's been around since the 1980s, a voluntary county program dealing with the loss of soil. And in 2015, that was amended in the buffer bill to make it more of a statewide program with some work involved by Bowser. And we wanted to go back to that voluntary county voluntary program in an effort to help local control and clarification of this really complicated issue of what's excessive, what's not excessive, who's going to be the soil loss cop, things like that. So we would like to go back to the voluntary provision the way it was prior to 2015. So the other couple of changes, some language change in the Young Farmer Program that put some language back in that allows the commissioner to exempt a young farmer from being enrolled in a farm business management class if he has a 4-year degree, for example, or has a lot of experience in farming, language that the department would like back in the bill. And the last provision added in the Senate was a exemption for truck washes that's been approved by the MPCA. It was heard in our committee, also heard in Chair Fabian's committee. It has to do with open air swine basins. If they are used strictly for truck washing, they have a fewer requirements. So again, that was approved by MPCA as well. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage a green vote on the concurrence.
Member from Rice, Representative Bly, on the motion to concur.
Thank you, Speaker. From what you were saying, Representative Anderson, I'm concerned that what you called a compromise was something that was put in. I'm not sure that the governor agrees to it. And there are good things in this bill. I would hate to see a veto on the bill. From what it sounds like to me, this is going to erase the buffer rule. It's going to go back to the way that it was before. Perhaps you can explain that a little bit in a few seconds here. But my understanding is that it reverts to the counties dealing with this issue. And I think there are only 5 counties that have an ordinance dealing with this. So that would mean most of the counties, this would not, they wouldn't enforce it or do anything with it. So, you know, sometimes those of us who might have been in favor of the buffer rule get accused of being anti-farmer. I have to tell you, you know, I've had farmers in my office, I meet with farmers in my district, and they're supportive of the buffer rule. And it's really an issue of farmers who are really making great efforts to do the right thing. And, you know, some farmers don't. And if a farmer suffers repercussions, and I've seen this happen, because of the bad behavior of another farmer, where do they go? What do they do? If a county doesn't have an ordinance dealing with this, I'm not sure they have a remedy. And it concerns me greatly, number one, because I'm concerned about the governor vetoing the bill, and number two, because I don't think it gives the protections that the buffer rule did. So if you could speak to that, and I would ask you to yield, and I am very concerned about this, and I have some more comments I'd like to make, but I'll yield to your comments.
Member, he will yield. Member from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and Representative Bly. This does not change the buffer law. The buffer law was passed in 2015, and that's going ahead. This provision was added when that law was passed back in 2015, and really didn't go through to any hearing process, things like that. It was added. And you talk about the situation of what happens if somebody has a severe erosion case, they have no recourse. Well, I would go and talk to my neighbor if that happened in my area, and if my neighbors had a blowout of a tile or a ditch, whatever, I would go and talk with them. And this neighbor-on-neighbor thing involving the government, again, there's just this feeling that let folks work it out themselves. And has this really been a problem? This law has been on, the buffer soil loss has been on the books since the 80s, and only 5 counties have adopted it. So again, I'm not seeing this as a huge issue. And if counties feel it is an issue, they can certainly adopt the ordinance. But we're saying let's let the counties have local control, and if they see this as an issue, they can adopt the ordinance on their own.
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Representative Anderson. Well, that's not how I see it in farm country where I am. Farmers often are not confident in confronting their neighbors. And it's not necessarily that easy. And I think in part that's why some counties haven't seen it as a problem. It's not an easy thing to go and confront your farmer on something, your neighboring farmer on something, and especially if they can just ignore you. Earlier I was reading an article about what's been going on in Wisconsin, where they have reverted to counties looking at these issues. And the article was written by an agriculturalist who works on land and water issues in Wisconsin, and he's very concerned that agriculture is becoming a danger because of the kinds of protections that can't be enforced for other farmers. You know, a former legislator, Doug Peterson, who was a former president of the Farmers Union, liked to talk about the right to be rural. And it's hard for me to imagine or understand how we can have a right to be rural, to live in rural communities, to survive in rural Minnesota if we continually allow our waters and our soil and farm country to be polluted. I was encouraged by the governor's, I think, courageous stand to say we should all be protective of water. We should all care about what happens to water and soil. I hear from my citizens and from farmers in my area, not all of them. Some farmers resent any kind of interference from the government. I understand that. They like to be independent and to do whatever they want. But it's important. It's important if we want to preserve rural life, if we want to preserve the opportunity for people to live and live in the kind of fashion that they have, to protect them as well. And I fear that bit by bit, little by little, we're taking away the protections that we're trying to put in place. In my district, an organization that's been around since the 70s, the Cannon River Watershed Association, has been trying to protect waters, conducts trainings for farmers on cover crops and other things, trying to help them see that there are better practices and there are better ways of doing it. And I think they're doing a good job, neighbor to neighbor, trying to help out. But they too say it's not enough. We have, Representative Johnson has spoken about this before, City of St. Peter, the City of Mankato, that have special experiences because farmers aren't always careful. I wish they were. I know it's a hard time for farmers right now. But that doesn't mean that we should just look away and let farmers who aren't interested in protecting land and water. And again, I know there are farmers who do an excellent job and care very much, and I suppose many of the farmers in the room here are those kinds of farmers. I would hope so. But I care about rural Minnesota. I care about the cities of Mankato and St. Peter. If Mankato, one of the fastest growing economies in our state, can't grow because they can't guarantee their citizens clean water, and there's a relationship to what's happening in farm country, I worry about that. And certainly, you know, the buffer rule doesn't solve all of the problems. And farmers and citizens need to work together to solve those problems. I don't question that. But we can't continually step away from the things that will help us keep farm country safe, keep rural Minnesota safe. This is an important issue, and it will affect the future of Minnesota going forward. And we can look the other way and say, oh no, it's no problem. We don't have to worry about this. It's just going to cure itself, it'll go away, we'll figure it out. There need to be pressures in place to make sure that those farmers that choose not to do the right thing will do the right thing. In my experience, farm country is very diverse. It's not monolithic. Not everybody agrees to the same thing. We have agricultural organizations that maybe present a united case and say, oh, we're all opposed to this, or we're all for that, or we're all doing a great job. We don't need to be encouraged to do anything different. We'll take care of it. We can work neighbor to neighbor. But it's not happening without some kind of pressure to make it happen. And I know there are concerns about the announcement that Bowser made about some rules that that got people very nervous, and it was an error to do that. And maybe that's what's driving this. You're nervous about what Bowser might do. I understand that. But this is wrong. This isn't the right thing to do. In Wisconsin, enforcing pollution measures is a real challenge. They can't fish in the waters. They're very concerned about things. Farm country is changing. I worry about the influence of the huge corporations, and we've talked about this before. Corporations are necessary. They do help things work. But when Milton Friedman said, the main purpose, the only purpose of a corporation is to make a profit, they have no public purpose, they don't have to be responsible to even the people that they buy things from, like farmers. What we see in farm economy are huge international corporations that can buy corn and soybeans and pork and beef from any country in the world. They don't have to buy American goods. What does it do? It drives the price down. Drives the price down. And the problem is that there's no way to fight against that. There's no way to push back to protect farmers. What's it going to be like in the future for farm country? Will it be completely emptied of people? Will we have electric tractors driving themselves around the countryside? I know I'm perhaps being a little extreme here and carrying things on to the future, but it worries me. It worries me what we're seeing happening to rural Minnesota. In Kansas, they are beginning to decommission townships because people have moved out because it's no longer livable. You can't make a living anymore. I'm not anti-farmer. I'm not anti-farmer. I want to see farm life and farm communities continue to exist, continue to be able to survive. And I'm very worried that we're headed down a path where we won't be able to protect that. I'm very worried. So I hope, members, that with this provision in there, we can't support the bill. And I urge a red vote.
Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, Representative Bly, you said you may be a little extreme. Yeah, I do believe that you are a little extreme. You said that farm country is changing. It is changing, members. High-tech farming today is incredible. How much farmers care about their land, their most valuable asset, is incredible. The amount of technology that's going into variable rate applications of herbicides and fertilizers is amazing. They're doing a great job. You know, Representative Bly, you said that you're not anti-farmer and you are for rural America, but many of the policies that you support, I believe, are negatively impacting rural America. You talk about big corporations. I live in a town of 2,700 people. I have a big corporation in my town. It's the lifeblood of my county, one of the lifebloods. When the DFL talks about things like minimum wage, members, who is it easier for to manage a mandate from the government on how much they should pay. The large, big box, corporate-owned shopping mall store that sells everything from groceries to tires, appliances, dog food, and who knows what else. Is it easier for that big corporation to absorb an increase in a mandated minimum wage? Or is it easier for the Coast True Value hardware store in Roseau that employs 7 or 8 people to absorb that on a very narrow profit margin to begin with? It's policies like that and laws that we're putting in place that are making it difficult. And the rules and so forth that we're putting on farmers is making it more difficult. It's tightening profit margins. With regards to the soil loss, this is a thing that's been in place for years. Representative Bly, if Representative Bly would yield to a question, Mr. Speaker.
He will. Representative Fabian.
Representative Bly, tell me how many cases of excessive soil loss have happened in the community that you represent?
Member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Representative Fabian, I don't know the answer to that question, although several farmers have, as I said in my earlier talk, that there are farmers who have talked to me about it. I haven't done a survey. I haven't looked at how many times it's happened. I don't know. But I know that it does happen, because I visited farms where it did happen.
So, members.
Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize. Members, it's in a landowner's best interest to keep the soil on their land. Okay? It's in their best interest for a variety of reasons. How many of you, I don't know, how many of you pay ditch tax? I do. I have to pay a ditch tax on a little piece of property that I own. It's in my best interest to make sure that the ditches don't get debris and soil in them. Because what happens if they do get soil and debris in them? Representative Hamilton, you know the answer. You got to clean them out, right? Where does the money come from that cleans out a ditch? It comes from the ditch tax. It comes from the landowners. So this soil loss provision that's in here, I've been told by people that work in the agency it's not that big a deal. It's not enforced. I trust our local counties to enforce this rule. If it hasn't been an issue, why are we doing it? Local people make great decisions. You know, we play ping pong in this chamber with local control back and forth. I respect that. But in this case here, I trust local people to make these decisions. And why do we have to have the big hand of state government threatening people? Members, agriculture is under attack. And a part of the reason why there is so much pushback is because there is, as Representative Bly referred to, there is a lack of trust in the ag community. The same farmers that Representative Bly that come into your office who are doing a good job, there is an element of distrust in them, I would guess, because there sure is in the area that I represent. Members, the provision that's in this bill is supported by Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, the corn growers, the soybean growers, the wheat and barley growers, and the Association of Minnesota Counties, to name a few. Why in the world we don't trust local people to make this decision is way beyond me. This provision, it was compromised over in the Senate. It passed by a large margin. We should be doing the same thing here. We should be standing up for rural Minnesota. We should be telling rural Minnesotans and farmers and counties and ditch authorities that we trust your decisions. We trust what you're doing. These are the types of provisions that have been coming forward in the recent years that are causing a great deal of angst in rural Minnesota. You can deny it, but it's true, members, it's true. Farmers that I talk to on a regular basis, they've had it up to here. They're done. They're through. The next election can't come soon enough. So, members, I encourage a green vote. Thank you.
Members, we're on the motion to concur to House File 4133. The member from Polk, Representative Keel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Bly, you referred to corporations as opting to purchase commodities wherever they could. I want you all to know that before I became a legislator, my job on the farm, among other things, was to sell our crops. So unlike a lot of things that you purchase in a store, the store says, this widget costs me X amount of dollars, this is what I need to run my store, and this is what you will pay as a customer for your widget. In my world, I look at how much wheat costs me to put in the ground. I assess that. I say to my husband, do you think we can get this amount for the year? We figure out the balance. And I look at the market every day, and I watch. I look for highs, I look for lows, I look for trends. Sometimes we have options in the markets, I won't go into detail, but to help us to cover that bottom line. I have sold wheat at $3 that cost me $6 to put in. You ask, why would you on earth do that? Because that was all the market would provide, and I needed to cover some of my costs. There were other days when I could sell my wheat for $8 a bushel, and I could cover those costs and future and past debts that I worked on. This happens with everything but the sugar beets I raise, because that's a cooperative, and we sell that together and market that. And that has a little different nuance. But what I want you to know about what agriculture does in the United States, we provide not only for the United States citizens, we provide for other countries. Our research works very hard at making sure that we have the best product we can put out there. So much so, we work on making sure that other countries have the commodities that they need, or the value in food that they need in order to be healthy and successful. We put education into putting protein into rice, so that countries that eat rice have more protein in their diet for their health. And those are all things that happen within our country, our research, and things like, in my world, the Northwest Experiment Station that does research. But more importantly, I want you to understand that when something happens in the world, that affects my price. I can think long ago to, if anyone knows about Chernobyl in Russia, there was an explosion of a plant, a nuclear plant, and that Chernobyl is where they have a lot of very valuable ag land in Russia. So much so, I thought I was going to get the $2 a bushel that year. I really was working on how do I make ends meet. Well, when Chernobyl happened, my wheat went from $2 to $6 in just a short time. Wheat doesn't move very far, cents usually. You're lucky if it goes 5 cents. Once in a while, about every 20, 30 years, it hops like it did back when we were in 2009, 2010. It really moved fast. But those are all effects of the commodities that we raise on the farm. And I want you to understand that's the challenge of agriculture. It's just one of the many challenges of agriculture. You referred to the water and the control and how we needed to control it from the state level. But I will tell you, I live in a township. You cannot be on a township board unless you reside in that township. Why some townships are being lost? There's not as many people residing in them, and they combine or they have some challenges. But you must be a resident of that township and be elected into that position. When you are on that, you also help assess the roads, but you also assess the water movement and how that changes. The county also watches how your water is handled. So there's a lot of local control that makes sure. And when you said farmers have challenges, yeah, it's hard sometimes to go to your neighbor and say, a little concerned about how you're treating your land or your water, the water flow, but it can be done, and it is done on an often basis. Sometimes it's a little challenging, and sometimes not. And by golly, if you don't follow the rules we have in place long before this buffer language, you can go to the county, you can go to your law enforcement, and it can be addressed. And it has been. I've watched it. My father-in-law's line, God bless him, he was very active in some watershed issues, told me one day when I said, "Why are you going to court on this? What's going on here?" And he says, "Well, Deb, we're fighting over water. And let me tell you, water's for fighting and whiskey's for drinking." And I remember thinking, oh, that was kind of a silly line, and now I know what he talks about. It's really important that we make sure the water flows and we handle it. You know, I'm a farm of, my neighbors are mostly dryland farmers. We rely on what God brings us. And so we have to be careful to make sure that we don't dry out our land. We work to protect that. We have flooding issues. We make sure that that works so that it floods, the water doesn't stand on crops too long. I've watched water drown soybeans. Soybeans don't like to be wet. And that's very challenging, and you can't control that. But you do want to make sure that your water is handled in a good manner so that it runs off when it needs to and it stays on the land when it should. And there's all kinds of, I won't bore you anymore with all the techniques that we do to manage it, but there's a lot going on right within our own townships and our own counties. And I want you to know that it is important to rural Minnesota, and we are active in taking care of our crops, or our soil and our water. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C. On the motion to concur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Keel, you weren't boring me. You really weren't. And I appreciate you sharing your stories about and explaining how you operate your farm operation. Some of the real joy I've had in this serving in the House is many conversations I've had with farmers along those lines. And Representative Fabian, you're right too. Modern agriculture is exciting. There's so much going on in farm country. The yields are what are saving us economically right now. But if you look at what farming is doing, and I think about it, how it looks different from the Jordheim farm where I used to hang out in the Red River Valley as a boy, it's a whole different deal today. And it's exciting because it does offer us the chance to provide food for the world and fuel for Minnesota. And as we all know, it's just a vital part of the economy. And so I'm glad to work with folks in this House and for many years now in supporting agriculture and making sure we're successful. As to what really is challenging farmers today, I'm going to take a little issue with the emphasis that I'm hearing. When I talk to farmers where I'm at, I hear three things. First is commodity prices. The price has been low. We all know this for several years. And farmers I represent are in pretty good, solid financial standing, but it's getting pushed. And when I talk to my bankers, that's where I'm hearing it the most, and the increased concern about that. So the commodity prices are really key. But the two things that I hear that supplement that and are directly related to commodity prices are first the renewable fuel standard at the federal level. They are scared about that. And there's effort, and it surprises me at the ongoing effort by the current administration to take on the renewable fuel standard. That would be devastating in these times, and that's very worrisome in farm country. And then the second issue is also coming out of Washington, D.C., the tariffs. Soybeans are still very vulnerable on that, and every soybean farmer has to realize that they realize the impact that could have on the price of soybeans, which are already challenged. And so, agriculture, I think the modern agriculture is exciting. I get to see it in my district, and it's really doing a great service to the state and to the nation and the world. But I do have a couple of questions about the concurrence, and so I'd like to get back to really what we're discussing here. And so First of all, I'd like to say it's good news to see this bill coming back without the groundwater protection rule language in it. I've spoken to this a number of times on this floor. This is progress. I really appreciate that. I've got to admit, though, that the soil loss thing I need to learn a little bit about. And I've been talking to a lot of folks about that today as this emerged, and I need a bit of a primer on that. And I come from it from this angle. A few years ago, I got a wonderful tour of a farm in Blue Earth County. And I spent a couple of hours with a farmer, and he just showed me his conservation efforts, his production operation. He's a corn, beans, and a hog farmer. And what is relevant to the discussion today is I remember we were driving along, and he pointed to some of what his neighbor was doing. And there was significant soil loss, and he said, I can't believe my neighbor's doing that. That's just absolutely wrong. There's no excuse for that. And he was really pretty disgusted by it. And, that's just and that can be a neighborly thing. Sometimes when I don't get along with my neighbors, I don't want to necessarily talk to them about it. I just, how do you handle that? And I think that's maybe even harder out in the countryside. And so my question is, how would, in a situation like that, where individuals or some folks in the neighborhood in the country are going, our one neighbor is really not farming the right way. How can we help that person? How can we address this? Maybe they chatted about it over coffee before, nothing happens, but they just going, that's not the right way to farm, and we're losing that soil. It can be filling up those ditches that Representative Fabian was talking about, and those sorts of things. So my question is, what is the difference under current law? As I understand it, there's a way that there is a process to make that complaint. And so my first question is, under current law, and would Representative Anderson yield to a question?
You will yield. Representative Johnson C.
My first question is, under current law, if this language is not adopted that's in this bill, how does that process work? So if I'm that farmer, I want to make a complaint, how does that work so it can be addressed somehow?
Member from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Johnson, well, this current statute is not being enforced yet. I've been told that they aren't going to be doing rulemaking for 2 more years. So what we're talking about are a lot of hypotheticals, what if. And to answer your question about if you drive down a road or if I drive down a road and see a bad gully erosion, my local SWCD, they know what's going on out there today, currently, and they've come and talked to people and saying, you have a spot there that is adding to erosion. We have some cost share available. We'll help you put in a water retention bank, things like that. That's being done today. And the bottom of what I think we're getting at, talking about today, is local control. Let's let our local counties keep doing this, clarification, and not have Big Brother Bowser coming in and saying, counties, you will do this, you will implement this, and that's what the concern is, Representative Johnson.
Member from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess it's my understanding that actually under the current law that was established a few years ago, that there would be the complaint made to SWCD, and somehow they would engage Bowser, partly to assure that funding would be provided to help that farmer rectify the situation. Would that funding still be available, assured in these situations in all counties in Minnesota if the language in this bill is adopted?
Are you asking Representative Anderson to yield?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Anderson P.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, this does not affect funding. Again, I think we're branching off into some areas. There's clean water funding. SWCDDs get that. There are areas that they concentrate on. For example, in my area, Lake Minnewaska, they've really concentrated on projects that the water drains into that basin, and they offer programs, offer help to put plans in place to correct some of these situations. That's being done today. That's being done as we speak when funding is available, and it goes out to each of the counties. It's a competitive grant type program, and when they get the funds, they put those programs into motion.
Representative Johnson C.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Anderson would yield to another question?
He will. Representative Johnson C.
Okay, thank you. Representative Anderson, I guess my question is, I'm genuinely seeking to learn here. I understand there's 5 counties that have or had the county ordinance. Is the situation you're describing, is that financing assured not only in those 5 counties, but in the other 82 counties as well?
Representative Anderson, P.
Mr. Speaker, Representative, I'm not aware that the funding is tied to the soil loss provision. Again, there's competitive grants, and counties and SWCDs apply for those grants. It's my understanding that it's not tied to any particular soil loss program, and the counties that have adopted this ordinance would have access to those same funds as others that apply for these funds as well.
Representative Johnson, C.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you can see, my concern is how this would work. I want that story I told, that situation, I want that to be able to be resolved. And I'm a local control guy. I see the value. I definitely see the value of SWCDs. They work just tremendously with our farmers. A lot of the business that's done in my area, both in the counties that I represent, I've seen a really good work by SWCDs working with the farmers over the kitchen table, figuring out solutions, working out overtime, sticking with it to make sure the changes are made, and that's important. But that funding source, I think, is an issue, because currently, as I understand the current law, is that if this is going through the process that is under current law, that if there is an expectation that that situation be rectified, that there is a guarantee of funding for that, or it wouldn't have to be. And I'd hate to lose that funding, so we got to keep watching that. And so my question with this whole thing is that this part of the bill has come before us, and I don't recall for a long time any hearings on the soil loss. I follow these issues as closely as I can, and I personally am a little unclear on the full impact on it. So it makes me think that maybe this would be better going to a conference committee going back to really get that resolved and completely resolved. That's my thinking at this moment. Thank you.
Member from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I've heard Representative Fabian and Representative Anderson speak to local control. And Mr. Speaker, and if I might, to Representative Fabian, I actually complimented you last night at a speech that I gave in front of manufacturers right after one of your gubernatorial candidates, Tim Pawlenty, explained how AI, artificial intelligence, is going to change farming and dramatically change farming and manufacturing and everything else we do. So yes, it's been mechanized in the farm country, but brother, you haven't seen nothing yet. But back to Mr. Speaker, when Representative Fabian talks about local control, and when Representative Anderson talks about, I think this should be local control. I think last year we had bill after bill after bill of, we can't have you have local control. This minimum wage for local control is unacceptable to us in rural Minnesota. This local control over plastic bags that are filling up our landfills, we can't have that in greater Minnesota. I could go on the local control. That is very self-serving. You sit and you complain about the fact that we or your local communities put regulations out there at a state level or a county level or any place else. But when it happens to you, when you have an issue that you want local control over, don't take our local control away. We just want to take your local control away. So that's what's got my dander up on this particular one. I'm like Representative Clark Johnson. I hadn't heard about this. I sit on the Ag Policy Committee. I hadn't heard about this all year. It came in a conference committee, and I've been doing catch-up. really ketchup. And I'm not known for my tactfulness in this world. I kind of tell it like it is. So we're going to have 82 counties that don't have any laws on this particular issue. And oh, if it becomes an issue, we'll put those laws in place. Now, the people I've been talking to haven't been direct about this. But this is a sneaky way to go after the buffer laws and devastate the buffer laws that the governor worked so hard to put into place. Which at the end of the day, if we have those buffer laws, will save this state hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in water treatment facilities for our greater Minnesota communities. I don't necessarily love all the things that we do here, but at least be honest with it. At least be honest with it. Let's not be hypocrites. It's okay for you, but it's not okay for me. If we're going to attack something, attack it head on. And if you don't like the buffer law, I understand. But I'm not hearing this as a huge, like everybody is against this. I think most farmers appreciate the fact that they are actually working to take care of the land, to make the water better. So, members, I took a bunch of notes. I won't try and bore you. I'm planning on voting against this concurrence.
Member from Traverse, Representative Backer.
Yeah, members, some of you know that I'm representing 7 counties. And one of the things that when you have such a large geographic area, you get to know the area. And people in St. Paul, Bowser, does not know the area. We talk about on this floor that agencies know better than local people. No, they don't. This summer, members, I had Bowser in my district misinterpreting the fine structure of the buffers. So yes, we can't have local control. We sure can't have control from Bowser because they can't even read the laws that we pass. So that's number one. Number two, this is all about respect, members. We have a side of the aisle that respects farmers, miners. That's what we have. We understand that farmers are good stewards of this land, not Bowser, not this administration. If you look at this administration, we've got ditch mowing. We have biodegradable corn dust that is a fugitive emission. And we're supposed to listen to Bowser? No way. Vote yes for this.
Members on the motion to concur. The member from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. There's been a lot of exchange here, and it's fruitful exchange. One of my comments was that farm country is diverse. And one of the problems with locally enforcing this sort of thing is that half ag land is rented. So even though a landowner might prefer certain practices, we aren't guaranteed that we know the person actually using the land is going to do the right thing. I've sat in on township and county meetings where these kind of disputes and have been dealt with, and they're not easy, and they're not always decided in the way that everyone would be happy with. Sometimes they need some guidance. And from my reading of this, I don't think that the money that Representative Johnson was asking about would be there with this change. Certainly there's water that goes to soil and water districts, and they can apply for grants, but that doesn't mean that they would have the money to reimburse or to help out the farmer in a certain situation. So that's a problem. I want to thank Representative Keel for her comments about the struggles of farming. It's enlightening for all of us to understand and know what it's like on a certain farm and dealing with the economy. But that's not every farm. It's not every farmer. But it's important for us to understand the complexity of farming today. And yes, there is lots of creative energy in agriculture. Some of it very good, and some of it not so good. And hopefully, those that are good will succeed, and those that aren't so good maybe won't. When I talked about corporations, I didn't say all corporations were bad. In fact, what I said was that corporations are necessary. And yes, if a corporation is really working in a community and helping that community do better, it's great. But that's not the case in everything. And especially when we give corporations a great deal of power up here in the legislature and up in Washington, D.C., where I understand corporate influence was behind the Farm Bill, which failed today. I think, as was said, the rules that are in place now have not necessarily been finalized. We're still working on them. I don't see why it's necessary to make this change at this point. I think the law that was moving forward is good, and we ought to give it a chance to see what it can do. I have to say, too, some of the response to or attacks on this side of the aisle, saying that we're anti-rural or we're anti-farmer, that's a political move. It's a political choice on your part to attack us, to get votes. It's frustrating to have you say that, have you argue that, when it's not entirely true. It's manufactured. Yes, I'm sure there are things you can point to that you're upset about and that you hear from your constituents that are upset. But when it comes to protecting the water and the soil and life in rural Minnesota, there are challenges, there are conflicts that need to be worked out, and they can't always be worked out just locally. A county is more likely to listen to a farmer who has greater influence in the county than a small farmer who doesn't. As we know in all government, it's a good thing, but we're dependent on the people who represent the citizens, the people on the township boards, people on the counties, people here in the legislature. We're dependent on individuals to represent them and to be honest and hear things out. I'm concerned that this provision coming late in the proceedings, not having been fully vetted, not having been talked about, there are questions, concerns, we ought to take more time. If this is a change that's really necessary, we can take it up at another time. We don't have to put it in this bill, which the governor has said if this kind of provision is in the bill, he will veto it. As I said before, there are good things in this bill. I'd like to see it succeed. This is a poison pill. It's not helpful. There are good provisions to help some dairy farmers who are finding it very difficult to survive. I listened to a Senate hearing not too long ago where the advisor for the milk producers who's come here from Croatia to tell us about the best kind of dairy farms we should have, said, let those small farms fail. Let them go under. They have no business being involved in dairy farming. Is that what we've come to? Get big or get out? What does that mean for rural life? What does that mean for Minnesota farmers? I like the fact that there's diversity in agriculture. I like the work that Representative Keel described and that she's doing. We need a diverse economy in rural Minnesota. We need to help rural Minnesota. I don't think this provision does that. Thank you.
Member from Hennepin, Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. We've really come a long, long way in this great nation. When our country was founded, 90% of the people made their living in agriculture. Our founders could not have imagined for a minute what this country has become. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But through time and through specialization, people have migrated to the city. And as more and more people came to the city, less and less people were on the farm, efficiencies were required. Today we have the most productive nation in the world in terms of feeding the world. Thank you, Representative Hamilton, Representative Keel, Representative Anderson. As recently as World War II, half this nation still lived on the farm. But today, 1.5% of the population is on the farm. So a Torkelson or a Hamilton or a Keel, or even some of you members that might be farmers on the other side, just one of those people is feeding all of us for the whole year. That's the reality of it. We've taken a lot for granted in our lifetime. We can go into a Byerly's or a Lund or a Cub Food and we can observe the abundance of everything that's available to us. We don't even think about where it came from. We go through the drive-through and we don't even think about the sandwich we're about to eat. We just know it's going to be there because we're consumers and we demand it. I don't make my living farming, but I do a little bit. This morning I got up at 4:30 in the morning and headed out in the cab of my tractor turning ground trying to get a few things done while we're here in session. Thank God I don't make my living in farming because it's hard work. Farming has become a high-tech industry and it's capital intensive, it's high risk. You got to know how to be a commodity broker and a trader. You need to know how to be a diesel mechanic. You got to weld. You got to do everything. And you can't just pick up the phone and ask somebody like we in the city, take for granted that somebody's going to come and take care of your flat tire. So this has become, over time, an issue of urban over rural because fewer and fewer people live in the ag communities. And even through our apportionment and representation, most of this body and the Senate is represented by urban interest. That's the reality. And so having a sensitivity about those people that we need to induce them to stay out on the farm, to do the work, to feed us, they don't have the conveniences we take for granted here in the city. Oh, gee, hon, let's drive into Minneapolis tonight and let's see if there's a band playing. You don't have that. You're invested in everything you have. Your family is invested in everything. Capital intensive, interest costs, and yet they don't get to choose their price. They have to take the price that is dictated to them by the market. So thank you, agriculture. Thank you for everything you're doing. We owe you a lot of respect.
Member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I think this is one of the longest concurrence discussions I've seen since I've been here. But anyway, I'll try to I'll try to make this quick. I serve on the Legislative Water Commission with Representative Bly and Representative Johnson. And one of the things that's come up there is that, or one of the main problems as far as the water is concerned, is that we have an MPCA along with Bowser DNR promoting non-peer-reviewed science standards onto our businesses, farms, and communities. And what that means, members, is there's been lawsuits in this area, by the way, and they're still pending. But what that means is you artificially inflate the cost of farming to our businesses and to our cities and communities, especially with wastewater, with no measurable improvement in the quality of water. So Chair Fabian last session, if I remember correctly, included a provision that the MPCA should have a independent group of experts give them a second opinion on the standards and mandates that they issue. The Dayton administration and the MPCA refused to do that. So again, members, this is 80 to 90% of the aggravation out there in the rural community. We have environmental groups along with state agencies that are promoting non-peer-reviewed science standards that are artificially inflating the cost for our farms, businesses, and communities, not by a few $1,000s, members, by millions and millions and millions of dollars. I had 2 communities in my district that have joined a lawsuit. One of them dropped out now because the pipes are exploding on their sewer system, and they had to, against the MPCA and the regulations they put out. But I think regardless of which side of the aisle we're on, we should be committed to peer-reviewed science that actually improves water quality and oppose mandates and standards that drive up the cost and aren't based on peer-reviewed science. Thank you, members and Mr. Speaker.
Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I apologize for speaking twice, but my name was brought up. I admitted at the beginning of my comments that we play political ping pong with local control. So I understand Representative Mahoney's comments, but I think that my comments were taken out of context. And also to Representative Mahoney's comments about this and the buffer law. Okay, repeat after me. The soil loss ordinance has nothing to do with buffers. Okay, the buffer law. All right? I didn't hear you, but that's okay. Okay. Representative Bly, you said that this provision is late and it's not been fully vetted. Well, let me tell you 2 things about that. Number 1, this is not being done in the dark of the night. And number 2, what was done in the dark of the night and what was not fully vetted and what was late was the soil provision that was tucked into the bill by the Board of Water and Soil Resources in 2015. Thank you, members.
The member from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Mr. Speaker, what passion about agriculture. Great to see that today. And I've been told that, well, yeah, I won't go into that. Anyway, I'm going to save my comments till 3rd reading, believe it or not. But Mr. Speaker, in the interest of the passion of agriculture, I'd like to request a roll call on the motion to concur.
Roll call being requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the motion to concur. The clerk will close the roll. There being 84 ayes and 38 nays, the motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File Number 4133, as amended by the Senate.
Third reading. Discussion. Further discussion. The author of the bill from Pope, Representative Anderson P.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker and members. Just one comment, then my closing comments. Representative Bly, you said you could understand that farmers may be frustrated by Bowser. You blame right they are. After what came out a couple of weeks back with the APO penalties, there is a whole lot of distrust with state agencies and especially Bowser. And this language pertains to Bowser. There is a great deal of concern about state agencies coming down, telling farmers what to do. But if I can recap for all of you on the other side of the aisle, what this provision does, it doesn't take away the soil loss monitor. If it's this wonderful thing you think over there, all it says is it's not applicable unless a local county or unit of government adopts it. Local control. If the soil loss monitor is wonderful, local counties or the SWCDs can adopt it, and then they'll have their soil loss monitor. I had no idea that this was going to take this long, and this honestly was an attempt at compromise. We've heard all session, whenever the nitrogen rule came up, how bad it was to come back to the legislature for approval. Well, we took that out, trying to make the bill more palatable, and did hear some thanks for that, but we wanted to get something in return that the farmers wanted. And this is high on their list of things that they're concerned about. So we gave up the soil loss monitor provision. That can proceed as it going to, but a lot of concern here with, again, state oversight over what should be a local issue of soil loss in the counties. So members, please support this bill. Give it a green vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 85 ayes and 37 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to. Announcement by the Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. The Speaker announces the appointment of the following members of the House to a conference committee on House File Number 3422. Fabian, Lewick, Lehman, Metza, and Eklund.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Pryor. For what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, the high school is called Santa Fe in Santa Fe, Texas. And there are 8 people dead, at least 8. We don't know how many of those 8 are students. We don't know how many are teachers. We don't know if it's a custodian in the building, but we know that they're dead. Right now, we don't know their names, but we'll find out. We'll find out who they are and how they died. This is the 22nd school shooting in 2018. When I came this morning, the flags were flying high. And there'll be a day when we turn that corner and the flag again will be at half-mast and we'll know why. I ask for a moment of silence.
Members, a moment of silence for the tragedy in Santa Fe. Conference committee reports.
Mr. Speaker.
Conference committee reports.
Conference committee report on House File Number 3232, an act relating to energy. The report is addressed to the Honorable Kurt L. Doudt, Speaker of the House, the Honorable Michelle L. Fischbach, President of the Senate. The report, we, the undersigned, conferees on the House File 3232 report, we have agreed upon the items dispute and recommend as follows. The conference committee report is signed by all three conferees on behalf of the House and all three conferees on the part of the Senate. O'Neill moves that the report of the conference committee on House File Number 3232 be adopted and that the bill be repassed as amended by the conference committee.
I recognize the author from Wright, Representative O'Neill, who will explain the report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the Solar Rewards Program. It's the update to the Solar Rewards Program. It's the exact same bill that we passed off this floor. The conferees agreed to some of the technical changes that were in my bill that were not in the Senate bill. And so it is the same bill that you've already passed once. Again, that's just making a couple small changes to the Solar Rewards Program to make it easier to use.
Discussion to the conference committee report. The
Mr.
member
Speaker.
from Nicollet, Representative Johnson C.
I rise to a point of personal privilege.
Representative Johnson, we are in the middle of a debate on the conference report. As soon as we take action on this adoption, I will recognize you for that
Thank you.
purpose. Discussion. Member from Member from Hennepin, Representative Wagenius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill had great potential, and the potential was not realized. Some folks will have an opportunity to build bigger solar systems, but other people who might have had the opportunity to have solar opportunities for folks who are on the lower part of the income spectrum, their opportunity was shut out with this bill, and I would urge people to vote no.
Discussion on the adoption of the committee report. Member from Wright, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would draw your attention to the fact that it passed the Senate, the other body, by 65-0. And I'm not quite sure what other people are not included in this, because it's really open to anyone, and it does expand the solar program as the solar advocates have advocated for and asked for, and we have done that for them. And so this is a comprehensive program that is easy to use, and we're making it even easier. So I ask for your support today.
Discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by conference.
Third reading, House File Number 3232, as amended by conference.
Third reading. Discussion. Further discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 87 ayes and 35 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by conference and its title agreed to. The member from Nicollet, state your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My point is I would like to tell the story of a woman named Shelley Joseph Cordell in light of the tragedy this morning. Shelley was the glue that held her family together, and every holiday and family dinner was in her home. She dedicated her life to caring for the elderly. Shelley had an adult daughter and didn't get the chance to live to meet her 3 amazing grandchildren. Shelley Cordell was 56 years old when she was murdered in the courthouse shooting at the Hennepin County Government Center on September 29, 2003. Her shooter bought a gun for $60 through a private sale at a gun show with no paperwork or background check. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Member from Morrison, Representative Creasha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, members, I move a...
My apologies. There's a resolution. My apologies. Member from Dakota, Representative Make-Wade. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege. I rise to tell the story of Chase. Chase was a wise old soul, far beyond his 24 years, a best friend to everyone, intelligent, good listener, kind. He could fix anything. He graduated early from college and was headed to law school. But Chase was shot to death in a St. Paul law office in April of 2016 by a prohibited purchaser that had been able to purchase a gun. Mr. Speaker, I can continue with the House resolution if that is okay with the body.
Representative Make-Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, today I have a House resolution with Representative Anna Wills that recognizes the Eastview girls basketball team for their win. Eastview High School was my alma mater. Thank you. So I will wear my letter jacket where I did not letter in anything athletic while I read their resolution. Whereas individual and team championships are highly sought honors in high school academics and sports, whereas the Eastview girls basketball team participated in the 2018 State High School Class 4A Girls Basketball Tournament Championship game on March 17, 2018 at Target Center, and I would like to yield to Representative Anna Wills.
Member from Dakota, Representative Wills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas the Lightning capped off an undefeated season, 32-0, by defeating the Hopkins Royals 68-63 in the championship game, the team's second state title in 5 years, and whereas Eastview, as the top seed in the tournament and playing in its 7th straight state tournament, used the strength of its rebounding and free throw shooting, 22 for 26, to overcome the stellar play of Hopkins star Paige Boykers, the state's top player, to win a hard-fought back-and-forth game, and whereas Eastview had 4 players named to the all-tournament team, more than any other school, now therefore, and I yield to Representative Aaron Make-Wade.
Member from Dakota, Representative Make-Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the State of Minnesota that it congratulates the Eastview High School girls basketball team on winning the state championship, dated April 19, 2018, signed by the Speaker, Majority Leader Pepin, myself, and Representative Anna Wills. Let's congratulate the Eastview Lightning on their win.
Representative Creasha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I move a recess to the call of the chair.
Representative Creasha moves a recess to the call of the chair. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The motion prevails. The House stands in recess.